Standard Time today. Trying to start at 10 anyway. I want to welcome Wen Chen. Met her last week and was really impressed with her story and the work she's doing, and just wanted to give her an opportunity to share her voice, to share her story, and just the work that she's doing. So, Wen, welcome. Good morning. How are you today?
Good morning, Dennis. I'm honored to be here today. Greetings from California. So, shall I introduce myself?
I'm so glad you're able to join. You were on with Changing Times with Lynn Morris and Dr. Mary Byrne the other day, sharing mainly the focus was on the human organ harvesting and some of those things, and some of the just crimes that were happening. But when you were sharing, one of the things that I noticed and I really heard in your sharing was that you really have a heart for your culture, your history, your background, your family, everything that you are. You're not trying to reject who you are, you're trying to embrace who you are, and you're trying to fight against some, different ideas and things that have come into culture, come into the world that are destructive. And I want to give you an opportunity to share your story about your background, because you're always focused so much on the facts and the information you're sharing. I want you to have an opportunity to just share yourself, your heart, why you're doing what you're doing, because I think, if I heard correctly, you're working as a biologist, a scientist, that type of thing, but then in your vacation time, you're speaking and you're sharing and you're going out and trying to save lives, help people. So why? Who are you? Tell me about your story.
I was born and raised in China. My parents were survivors of the Great Cultural Revolution. That was when the Communist Party, right, in the 60s and 70s, shut down the whole education system for like 10 years so that they can brainwash people. So my parents survived that Great Cultural Revolution because they both graduated from top universities in China before the Cultural Revolution started. And during those 10 years, over 2 million intellectuals were killed. But they miraculously survived and raised me and my brother after the Cultural Revolution. And they had mixed feelings. They always told me that you need to study, but don't be a top student. You just need to have okay grade, be a mediocre so that you can find a job.
You don't want anybody, don't let anybody notice you, just kind of,
yeah. So
and they were
like,
educated. You said they were educated,
yeah,
so
they were very well.
So they could have
educated.
been very rounded up into camps, killed other peers. They would have seen this happen to their peers, and so that brings
my dad saw his kids killed in front of his eyes.
Yeah.
And so both of them like pretended to be not educated. Like,
Sure.
when I was a kid, right? Like I had like friends, like same school. I went to my friend's house and home, right? Like I was so surprised, like none of them had such a big bookshelf like my parents did. Like we had a big bookshelf in my parents' house, right? Like with many books. My parents I never saw them reading those books. And none of my friends had such a giant bookshelf at home.
Right.
I was so surprised, like why did they keep so many books, but they never read them? And then after I came to the US, I realized, like they had a very different background because they were very, very well educated. But like they had such a mixed feeling. They kept us in very, very bad schools in China, right? Like so that they say, we can protect you, like because we know all the teachers in this school. And I was so surprised, protect us from what? And
Wow.
so they hided us in a very bad high school, like, where nobody ever went to college in that high school. Me and my brother, we finished that high school, and then we were kind of like a very rare people, very like aliens in that high school because nobody studied, but we both loved to study.
Yeah.
And we both went to college. And my experience of going to college was even more bizarre because my parents always wanted us to send us to a bad college. As it's the same logic, right? You need to
Right.
go to a bad college. You just need
Yeah.
to get a degree. Then
Yeah.
you can find a job, an
Yeah.
ordinary job.
Yeah.
And but when I was
Don't
six,
get too carried away. Just enough to get a decent job. Just to, yeah.
yeah, like so. But when I was 16, I was in like a 10th grade, like 11th grade, and my China started to have this science competition. Like they wanted
Mm.
to go to international science competitions,
Oh.
to get some medal or something. It's like going to Olympia. It's called like
Right.
a science Olympiad. Like many young students here probably have had
Oh
that
yeah.
experience
Yeah.
before.
Yeah. They have like the science
But I,
fairs and stuff they have here. Yeah.
yeah. And they had awards, right? Like, so my teacher said, oh, since Wen is the best student in our school, let's just send her to this science Olympiad, just give it a try. And so miraculously, like, I got a first prize, like, in the state, like,
Mm.
we call it province in
Yeah.
China. I got a first prize, and I went to national. I also won a prize at a national,
Wow.
and then immediately I was offered like an opportunity to go to any university in China. I can choose any major,
Wow.
so I was immediately taken by one of the top universities in China, and
Oh,
then I
wow.
went to college. Right, my parents had no control since then
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Well, that.
basically I no longer belong to
Yeah.
them.
So how did they? I mean, so this is 16, 17, you said? That's how old you were? So what was their reaction to this? Had to be scary for them, right? They're proud but fearful.
Yes,
Right?
yeah,
Are they losing you to the state? I mean, all the things that are happening, that's wow. What did you see in
yeah.
him? Did you?
There was, I think their first response was like, "Well, there must be a mistake. That can't be."
Didn't we
Why
tell
got
you
that
not to
state
do
right?
that?
Yeah. Like, I mean, of course, I was always the best student at
Yeah,
school. I guess, like, I was talented somehow, right? Like,
yeah,
remember, my dad always told me, like, you were able to count until after
yeah,
10 when you
yeah,
were 2 years old. I saw
yeah.
that every kid can count after 10 when they were
Right,
two,
right.
right? Like, but
Yeah.
no, no, no. Like, I have two daughters, like, neither of them can count above three. Even after
I'm
three or
still
four, they
working on
can't
it
count above.
myself. Yeah.
But like I was talented in numbers. Like I can
Yeah.
remember every number. Like immediately I had very good memory, and also I had this affinity to science. Like once I got the concept, like I get it very easily. Like I remember in that science Olympiad competition, we were 16. We were in high school. Everyone was in high school, and the competition was they used college questions. It was chemistry. My major was, my subject was chemistry. They
Hmm.
used the college level chemistry to test high school kids, and I never read college level chemistry textbook.
Hmm.
I all I was like did was like I went through high school chemistry textbook and I went through them really thoroughly and I got all the key essential ideas behind
Uh,
that, and I was able to solve all the college level
yeah.
problems.
So you're
And I
able
got
to like see the pattern, understand the process. When it came to the numbers, the chemical construction, however you broke it down, that you're able to see that very clearly. Yeah, I would say it's a gift
yes,
from God. That it's a blessing
it
from God that He
definitely
gave you.
definitely was a gift from God. And so that was how, I mean, I jumped out of the world arranged by my parents, right? Like
Mm.
they had a plan for me, but
Right.
I was able to
Yeah,
get away from
definitely
that.
not the path you were going. Not at all.
Exactly. And
Be-
I definitely think there's a reason for God to put me here,
yeah.
because if I lived in their plan, on their path, there's no
Right.
way I can come to the United States.
No.
There's no way I can speak out like I do today.
No, it never would have happened. And it wasn't because they didn't love you, right? It was because they did love you. That's kind of the thing that happens when a culture gets invaded, when a mindset gets set on these things that aren't balanced and right. Imagine a mindset of getting rid of people that are educated so that you can do what you want to do. That ought to tell you something about the fact that what you're wanting to do probably isn't all that positive. Why wouldn't you want people to be educated? Why wouldn't you want to know the science of things, how things work? because the more we know, the more we're able to help, solve problems, to care for others, to provide life for others, freedom, those types of things.
Yeah, there's a saying like choose will set you free, right? Like, the
Yeah.
Communist Party don't want you to set you free. They don't want you to know the truth.
Yeah.
They want to brainwash everyone so that they can, easily control them, can turn them into
Yeah.
machines.
Yeah.
And I remember my parents had such a mixed feeling, right? Like they
Oh,
kept
yeah.
telling me not to be a top kid, not to be a top kid.
Right.
But they still supported me
Yeah.
when I was interested. Like, I was interested in astronomy when I was in high school, and we had no money to buy a telescope. Like, telescopes were expensive.
Sure.
So my dad used materials he can find, and he constructed a telescope. He built a telescope. He and my brother. Like, my brother is 5 years older than me, so they built a telescope for me. I mean, they did supported me very much, and my mom took me to all the competitions. Think about, like, she had to,
Yeah.
spend time to take me to all these competitions. I was 16, right? She
Right.
had to escort me to all the tests, and they did make the effort. They did support me, although they had such a mixed feelings. Oh, don't be a top kid, don't be a
Yeah.
top kid. But they were still proud of me when I
Right.
was a top kid.
Yes.
I mean, they had such a strange feeling. Like, I didn't understand it until I came to the US, right? I finished
Yeah.
college in China, like a top university. Then naturally, I came to the US for graduate school. And I came to the US, and then I learned about the history of China. Like, I never learned this when I was in China about the Cultural Revolution, how the Communist Party persecuted intellectuals. And then I could understand why my parents behaved in such a weird way.
Yeah, yeah, because as we're telling the story, you're looking back knowing what they went through. But as a kid, you didn't know. All you knew was it was a little bit of a mixed message. You knew they wanted you to do really well and to learn, but you also knew there was something about not getting too much, all of that fear, and that had to be really hard for your mom. I think about, I think before we went on the air, you were sharing about you came to the country and you were at the store and someone smiled at you, and it was just so different, that someone actually looked at you and smiled. You don't look at people. That had to be hard for your mom, going to all these competitions, these different things, knowing that you're different than so many other kids, so people are going to notice, not wanting to be seen, but yet proud of what you're. I mean, that had to be really torturous for them in so many ways.
Yeah. My parents, I mean, when I think about them, I just think about, like, they are also brainwashed, right? My
Yeah.
parents always saying like they were not persecuted during the Cultural Revolution because they were not detained. They were not detained, right? So because they pretended, they hided themselves really well.
Yeah.
Like, both of them were from top universities, and my dad wanted to be a nuclear scientist when he finished a bachelor degree, but he was taken to a coal mine and dig the coal for 10 years. And my mom finished college in a very good university, and most of her classmates expected to enter the central government, become a government official. And she was taken to a car manufacturing shop and become a secretary there.
Yeah.
So both of them, like, my dad did the coal for 10 years. That was, trying to be a nuclear scientist, but end up digging coal for 10 years.
Yeah.
And the reason he no longer dig the coal is because he got such a poor health. But his health deteriorated because of the malnutrition. Doctors had to remove 3/4 of his stomach. And he lost so much blood that, the Communist Party thought he was going to die. Then they said, okay, send him to his wife's province. They were separated in 2 provinces. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
They purposely separated the couple to 2 provinces, so they can only meet each other like two weeks per year. That was how my mom raised me and my brother, as like almost like a single mom. Let me turn off.
Yeah. It's the light coming
Sorry.
coming in the window that's throwing your lighting
That's
off a little
quite
bit, but
annoying.
yeah, it's
Yeah. See if I can get any better.
yeah.
This is a problem of California. It's
Yeah.
so bright at this time. Yeah.
Well, it'll
Uh,
change. It's moving, so it's not wherever it's at now. It's going to go a little different. But good morning to
I'm
you, by the
sorry.
way. Yeah, you're in California. I'm
Yes,
in
I know. It
Springfield,
was
so
completely dark.
yeah, it's
It
pretty
was
early.
completely dark. It was completely dark and warm. Like, but now the sun is coming in from my window. Still very bright. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. But
No,
anyway, you get the
it's okay.
real life experience
Hey,
of like interviewing someone from California.
it's what
Yes,
it's all about.
it's getting even better.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's the beauty of having the time to share and to do it in this way where it's not a problem, especially since and that my main concern a lot of times is having audio to share because then but yeah it's we'll live with the lighting and all that it's not going to be a problem. I thought it was interesting because you said that your parents weren't detained like in a concentration camp or something like that, but they certainly were detained in their mind and their ability and their, I mean, so much, right? They were prisoners from that point on in so many
Yeah.
ways, weren't they?
Yeah, I mean, just think about their personal life, right? They were forced to live separately for many years, and their dream, right, like their
Yeah.
career, was ruined. Were both ruined, right?
Yeah.
And it's just unbelievable. Like, but they still saw like they were not persecuted because they saw much worse case.
Right.
Before I came to the U.S., right, because I saw how my parents were separated and my friends' parents were separated, I didn't know that a married couple was supposed to live together. I
Uh,
didn't know that. I thought all couples can live separately. I thought
yeah.
that was a norm because it was indeed a norm in China
Mm,
during the Cultural Revolution or after the Cultural Revolution. So when I came to the US, I saw my colleagues later on, right? They moved to another state so that
yeah.
they can live with their spouse. I said, why don't you just live separately and keep your
Yeah.
job?
Yeah. You can
We were so
see each
brainwashed.
other for Christmas and New Year's. What,
Yeah, we were all so surprised, like because in China, like we lived in such a state that you think it was normal. You think it was normal for people to be detained, like just because they got a higher education or because they said something against Communist Party. You thought it's normal, like people lost their job and lost their family members because the Communist Party no longer liked them. You thought it was
Yeah.
normal. That
Yeah.
was all part of the propaganda, right?
Yeah.
Until you're able to live in a world with freedom, you see the true life, how true
Mm,
people like mankind should live.
yeah.
And you realize, wow, I lived in a bubble before. That was not normal. Like the state of China was not normal.
Yeah, yeah. You talked about that earlier, I think, before we went on air about that whole bubble concept and just seeing that. It's normal. You see it all around you, and you just for someone that didn't experience something like that, to imagine that you see somebody being arrested, you see somebody disappearing for a while because they got in trouble with the government or something, and you immediate reaction is you keep your head down and you're thankful it wasn't you and you just keep on going and you go and
Exactly.
it's just part of life. It's like oops, it's like you accidentally I don't know, drop something or so. It's amazing how common it becomes. I think it'd be hard to process and so that some of those culture shocks that you would have experienced coming to the United States and seeing these differences.
That was how the Communist Party persecuted people, right? They always target less than 5% of population until the rest of the 95% say, oh, you are not that 5%. You should be thankful to the government. You should join the government to crack down that 5%. And if
Hmm.
you like doing those things, like you should report them to the authority, you're going to get a cash reward and you're going to be honored as a hero.
Yeah.
Like you should report your parents if they say something against the party,
Right.
and you become a hero because you love your country so much that more than you love your parents. Like that it was a role model we saw in China. Like
Mm.
kids report parents to the authority. People report their friends to the authority. They were
Yeah.
honored on national TV as heroes, and that's why people lost the trust.
Hmm.
That's why like nobody would smile at the strangers. When you see a stranger, your first response is like, this is probably my enemy. If I say something wrong, this person will report me. And that was why, like in China, we never smile at strangers, right? Like
Mm.
when I came to the US, I saw like strangers on the road, like smile at me. I was so freaked out to say, "What's wrong with this
Why are
guy
you doing
smiling?
this?
I don't even know him."
What is
So
wrong with this person?
yeah, like all of these concepts in China, right? Like it was wrong. It was totally wrong, but it was against humanity. And I didn't realize this was propaganda until I came to the US. When you say away from propaganda, many of these propaganda is not about like what the government said, but about the way they teach you to think,
Hmm.
the way they shaped the Chinese people.
Hmm.
Like you think in a Communist Party's way. Like
Hmm.
anything done by the Communist Party, even after they kill your family, you still
Yeah.
think they're good. Your family.
It's what was best for the, however you say it, the
The
people,
country.
the
Yeah.
state, the
So
country. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And in reality now, when it comes to, just as a segue here, a little different topic maybe, culture, the Chinese culture and that background. Tell me a little bit about growing up in the culture. As an American, I didn't grow up celebrating Chinese New Year or anything like that. What were some of those kind of things like? In our country, we have different kinds of holidays, Christmas and different things, so it's so different. Give us a little insight into your childhood and some of those things.
Well, I think many area of China, right? Like China is a very big country, and every area has their different culture a little bit. Like my
Yeah.
parents are from Fujian province, a southern province. The province right across ocean to Taiwan.
Okay.
So people say I look like a Taiwanese because genetically we were similar, right? Like
Yeah.
we were all very short,
Yeah,
petite.
definitely a lot of familiarity there. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, in China I mean, in my childhood, in the countryside, right? I mean, not my parents' home, but my grandparents' home. They did preserve a lot of like very, uh, what do I say, traditional things because they are in the countryside, not very well controlled
Mm.
by the party. There was still a lot of like traditions. But like I think the problem is like in China, like they removed everything from the textbook. Like
Yeah.
the Communist Party distorted the textbook, biggest problem. So you still have the superficial forms, like for the new year you're supposed to do this and this and that, but you forget why you do that, right?
Mm.
Because historically people did that for a reason. Like you celebrated New Year, you like because you welcome the coming of spring, you want to drive away the evil. Like so,
Mm.
what is evil, right? Like the Communist Party distorted all the traditional value, and so like they turned many of these holidays into opportunities of celebrating communism, right?
Mm.
Whenever they have dance, right, they would do a dance to praise Communist Party. Like whenever they have a song, they would have the song. The lyrics would be praising the Communist Party. So that was a big problem, like for people growing up in China, right? Like whenever you think about the Chinese culture, you think about communism,
Mm.
because the Cultural Revolution for those 10 years, the Communist Party already eliminated the traditional values. So
Yeah.
they killed all the teachers, right? So that you can no longer learn them, and they distorted all the textbooks, all the historical stories you learn from Chinese textbooks were distorted. Like they rewrote the story, they rewrote the history to in a way to so that they can easily turn them into praising the Communist Party or like demonizing the traditional culture. They will always tell us like ancient Chinese they were stupid, like superstition, like Communist Party brings you better
Yeah.
life. So
Yeah.
that was taught in China.
It's
That
more,
was a
it,
big
more,
problem.
more, more civilized, more advanced, all that kind of stuff. Just so much better, so much better.
Yeah, that was how they destroyed Chinese culture, and that was how the Communist Party destroyed other minority groups' culture. Like for example, like they would eliminate Mongolian culture, right? They would force Mongols to speak Chinese. They can no longer speak Mongolian. They can no longer read their history, and then they can easily Communist Party can easily brainwash this group, right? They also, eliminate Tibetan culture, right? You can still do Tibetan dance, but it has to be praising the Communist Party, right?
Right,
You can
right.
do like a bigger dance. It has to be praising the Communist Party, and they do not allow you to learn your native language. And like even in China, we are Chinese, right? We are Han Chinese, but Han Chinese is also very diverse. We are in Fujian province, so we have our dialect. It's almost like our native language, although Fujian dialect is very, very different from Mandarin. Like it almost sounds like Japanese. You can understand Fujian dialect, but the government will not allow people to speak that dialect or have radio stations broadcasting that dialect.
Sure.
They want to disconnect you
And
from
and
your
it,
history.
and as long as you're part of
So
the 5%, then the other 92% don't want to stand up with you.
that's
So
true. That's
yeah,
yeah. Yeah.
it's
So
a
I learned my culture after I came to the US because although we had some education in like a high school, all the history books were distorted. So I learned most of my Chinese culture after I came to the US. I remember like when I first saw the Shenyun Performing Arts show, the dance,
mhm.
Chinese dance show Shenyun.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
was in 2007. When Shenyun first started the tour, I saw Shenyun. I was so surprised because Shenyun was for China before communism, right? So it's a
mhm,
dance and music show for China before communism.
mhm,
I was so surprised when I saw Shenyun in 2007 because I had never known in my whole life that the Chinese culture was so elegant, so brilliant.
mm,
I mean, when I saw the dancers flying like on the stage and all the stories they told was so touching.
yeah,
I was so surprised, and I never knew like my culture was so brilliant. And I decided like I wanted to learn more about my culture,
yeah.
and that was when
Because
I
you
started
didn't
to.
really experience the reality of it growing up because of that overshadowing, that other forces that came in and were taking culture away. We're getting rid of the teachers. We're getting rid of the information. I think of in America years ago, there was a textbook and they were talking about the history being taught to kids in school, and it had like a paragraph on the founding of the country and 3 pages on Marilyn Monroe in a history textbook of the United States of America. And it's like, what exactly are they doing? Just the education system, how that gets changed, and just amazing. And yeah, that group you're talking about, they have here in Branson, they've been there and have. I've seen it. It's just incredible. And I love like you said, the story that's in there. That there's even more than just what they're performing. There's also there's depth, there's soul, there's feeling in what they're sharing.
Exactly. Like I was so touched, like, stories, ancient Chinese legends carried so much value,
Yeah,
traditional Chinese value. And this traditional Chinese value actually is very, very similar to your tradition, like the
yeah.
Western,
There's
history,
lot
Western
lot of
traditional value.
wisdom, a lot of wisdom within.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes, exactly. Wisdom. I love this wisdom from ancient Chinese culture. I think since I was a child, although they distorted history, I mean, they cannot really change the poems written
yeah.
by ancient Chinese, right? I remember when I read some poems written by ancient Chinese, I felt very touched. And I didn't know what touched me until I left China. I came here. I watched the Shenyun. I realized like I was touched by the meaning behind those poems.
Mm,
Like all these traditional value carried by these characters, Chinese characters. I learned them. I was very touched, and I want to learn more about those. And I wanted to share this with people. So I work as a scientist. Like I came to the US in 1994. I got my PhD in biology in 2000, and I stayed to work for the institute where I got my degree. I have been working as a staff scientist since then. So I'm very good at reading. I make a living by reading. I also read Mandarin, right? So I have been reading Chinese literature. I craft talks
mm,
about the Chinese history. Like I have a talk about the history of tea. like how the tea culture evolved in China. I have a talk about Chinese medicine and meditation,
Yeah.
so I
It,
would craft talks,
it's
and I
it's
would
it's not just about reading tea leaves either, right? There's so much more
yeah,
to
yeah.
it.
I would combine all these historical stories together and dig out the traditional value behind them. And I would craft talks. Usually they're like a range from 20 to 40 minutes. And I in my workplace I give a talk every year to celebrate the Lunar New Year. I would give a feature presentation on one subject
Mm,
of the Chinese history, right? Like that's why I crafted tea talk. I crafted like a meditation talk. I
yeah,
crafted a talk about ancient Chinese women, and all of this
yeah,
I would, because I can't dance like Shen Yun, but I can talk. I
yeah,
can talk. I can read all these stories and share these stories with my American friends. So that is also, I would say that's my public service to the community. Like I would read
absolutely.
Mandarin and and craft talks in
Yeah.
English so that people can learn about Chinese culture before communism. And I really see like it's
You're
very
doing
important.
something similar to what the ancient poet did that touched you, right? By recording,
Yes,
by taking words and recording it in a way that they're sharing something more than words,
yes,
a voice. You're doing the same thing. Sharing a voice, sharing something deeper and richer than you or anything about anything around us, right? It's just it's so deep what you're able to do and to dig into, and I'm so thankful that we have this opportunity to share.
yeah. And at the same time, I also have talks about modern China, and then that also touch a lot of human rights topics, right? Like when we talk about modern China after the Communist Party came, definitely that's like what my parents went through, right? Like if you
Right.
think about what my parents through, my family went through, I can craft that into a talk. Like that's just pure family experience, right?
Yeah.
About the Cultural Revolution, and my brother and I, we went through the Tiananmen massacre. Like not exactly, but like we were brainwashed during the Tiananmen massacre, and
Sure.
that was a very important incident in my life, I would
Yeah.
say. When Tiananmen massacre happened, I was in high school. I was like 15, 16. I was very, very brainwashed. Like
Mm.
because I saw like the government TV, Chinese government said that the students killed the soldiers,
Mm.
and the government never killed any student. And I believed that when I was in China, right? Like because you
Right.
live in this bubble propaganda, that's all you heard about. And I remember like two incidents like related to Tiananmen massacre in China. Like once was like when I went home one day, my dad was watching TV. You know, so my dad didn't notice me that I returned home. Like he was shouting at the TV because it was news like about Tiananmen massacre. No student died, and my dad was shouting to the TV, saying, "You said no one died. How come there was so much blood stains on Tiananmen Square from the footage?" Like my dad shouted at the TV. He was angry. And then he saw me and he just stopped. He just left the room. He never told me anything. So he knew, but he would not tell me because he was afraid of me reporting him to the
Sure.
authority. Remember what I said, right? Like, children were encouraged to report your parents to the authority. He
Right.
didn't want to tell me what he thought about Tiananmen massacre because he did not want me to report him. That
Right.
was my dad. And then I remember I went to college, right? In college, you have students from all over China, right? Like I had two friends from Beijing. In Beijing, everyone witnessed Tiananmen massacre. It was happening right in front of their
Right.
house, right?
Yeah.
And I remember there was once like the girls, like the college girls, we sat together, we were chatting and we were eating and we were like having fun. And then somehow, for some reason, we talk about the Tiananmen massacre. And I said, "Oh, those students were so bad. They killed the soldiers. How could they do that?"
Yeah.
I mean, I was like 18, 19, right? And
Wow.
I remember there were two girls from Beijing sitting next to me, and they just had this so shocked expression. Like when they look at me, I said like, and then they look at each other, and then they look at me again. They did not say a word.
Oh wow.
I remember I would never forget that expression from those two girls. to Beijing girls because they must have this message to say, oh, she was so brainwashed, but we should
Yeah.
not say anything because she can report us to the authority if we say something. I was, I would
So,
never forget that.
well,
I would never forget that.
when did you realize what happened in that moment? Because it would have been, what, years later when you
Years later,
realized? Yeah,
after I came to the United States. I
yeah.
came to the United States in '94, right? And in 1995, I was working in a lab, like laboratory to do experiments, and I had two colleagues, right? They just like one was from Taiwan, the other was American. So they both asked me, how could your government be so bad that they could kill innocent students on Tiananmen, right?
Oh,
Those were my colleagues in graduate school, and and I of course I argued with them. I said, "Oh, those
well,
students were so bad that they killed the soldiers,"
uh,
and they were so shocked, like, "Wow, you didn't know any of those?" And I argued them with them. I was in tears. I said, like, "How could you be so anti-China, defame my government?" Right? And my colleagues were so surprised. They told me, "Oh, these were all lies by the Chinese government." I still wouldn't believe them, but they would show me like the videos, like
yeah,
pictures. They told me like all the Western media reports, and then it took me like many months, like 3 or 5 months, to gradually realize that maybe I was wrong.
yeah,
Maybe I was wrong. And I remember in graduate school, right, we also had students from Beijing. So one of the students was from Beijing. He was a good friend of mine. I asked him one day in private, I said, did anyone die in Beijing during the Tiananmen massacre? And he just naturally responded, of course. Like he said, two of my classmates were killed in high school. I was so shocked because, that was in the US. Like, we were good
mm.
friends. He was not afraid of me reporting him to the authority. And then I was realizing, wow, students were indeed killed on Tiananmen.
Mm,
And that was a very critical moment in my life to
yeah,
realize that I was brainwashed in China.
hmm,
And then you have to break one lie after one lie, another lie, another lie. And it took me quite a few years. I
yeah,
think in 2001 or so, I thought I had enough. I'm going to speak about human rights in China. I'm going
mm.
to have talks of human rights in China.
And
That was a very critical incident in my life.
and when I think about that process where you're arguing, wait, you're going against my country or my government, I think, your relationship with the government at this point was fairly positive, right? That you had help with education, I mean, so even though you're seeing some of these things and now you're able to look back and see them, at that point in your life, I mean, you've had a fairly positive experience overall, I think, with the government, with those types of things. And so realizing that difference between these ideologies, these propagandas, these lies that come into a government, a culture, whatever, and then the truth that's there. That's a lot to go through.
Yes, I think the important issue here is that, you equal the Chinese government to the Chinese culture, to the
Yeah,
Chinese history and identity.
yeah,
And whenever you criticize the Chinese government, the brainwashed Chinese people will think you're against my identity as a Chinese. It's such a big
yeah,
insult.
yeah,
And that is the result of the Communist Party want to
yeah.
achieve, right? They destroyed the Chinese culture through the Cultural Revolution.
Sure.
And then they replaced Chinese culture with Communist Party's version of
Yeah,
Chinese culture, right?
yeah,
And they replaced the concept of China with communism.
yeah.
So if you're criticizing communism, they say you're anti-China, you're
Sure.
insulting all Chinese.
Yeah, because
This is a
every
propaganda.
celebration now, every event, everything is now celebrating the state, celebrating communism, celebrating all that. So
Yeah, they replace that.
yeah,
And I think this is a huge problem to Chinese, right? That makes them harder to accept the truth because you can no longer criticize communism. And I also see that a big problem in Western countries like the US, right? If you criticize communism, like maybe 1/3 of Democrats would say you're anti-China, you're
yeah,
anti-Asian, you're racist.
yeah,
And this is the propaganda they want to achieve. This is the result they want. They want to brainwash all people all over the world that Communist Party means China. If you are against Communist Party, then you're against Chinese culture. You're against all Chinese.
And that's the
And this
importance
is
of being able to
why,
have these conversations, to talk, to say,
yeah,
what are we, let's define what we're talking about. Let's look at it, when we're talking about a group or a political idea, or we're talking about a people, let's look at the different things. And, you know,
and I think this is the biggest contribution of Shen Yun, like be able to distinguish Chinese culture from Communist Party, because they want to show you China before communism, and then you look at China after communism and say, hey, this is very, very different. And this is also why I want to talk about the Chinese culture and history. Right? When I talk about Chinese culture and history, I also want to show people China before Communist Party destroyed it. So I think that can help people to separate these two concepts so that they are no longer brainwashed by the Communist Party.
Amen. And it's for us Americans living in our culture, these ideas, these concepts, sometimes they take on different names. There's communism, socialism, different things that come out. But understanding these ideologies and these political ideas, these ways of governing, or however you word it, that are not good. We have so much of it in our culture. I talked about a little bit the textbooks, how they were changed, and our education system. We're seeing so many changes in this country, and it's so important to know history, to know the importance. Our country's a young country here in America. To know those things, and going back, China has such a rich history, and like you said, so big as well. So many different cultures within the culture, so many different traditions, different groupings of people. It's as we know and are able to embrace who we are, then we can embrace others, right? And love and respect the differences, and be strengthened by them, rather than having to have everybody agree with this one thing, this one way. Embracing that uniqueness that we have is so important.
And I also believe that the traditional culture, Chinese culture, or any other culture, right, has so much wisdom embedded.
Yeah.
Like all of these wisdoms, it's about how to get along with nature. Instead of changing nature, fight with nature. You cannot win.
No.
But if you fight with Mother Nature, right? A big wind can blow everyone up away. We have so much wisdom accumulated from our ancestors. We should not just abandon them and to reinvent the wheels, right? We already had so much wisdom, can solve so many problems in the current world.
Well, I think so my wife, her family comes from a Portuguese colony in India called Goa. Then her family moved to Africa. She grew up there. Well, when she was pregnant, we have different issues with health or something, we'd ask her mom. She would tell us something. Didn't always make sense to us or whatever, but we would do it. These old wives' tales, they would call them, or this ancient wisdom, these natural home remedies. There's different names they'd use. Always worked, whatever it was, because they grew up without all this, medicines and chemicals and all these types of things. And they knew the natural things. And man, there's so much, I know you mentioned, I think the herbology and some of those things earlier, some of those natural things. There's so much wisdom there. And rather than looking at petroleum products and chemicals to try to figure out how to help people, it's a little more research into some of those areas. It's so beneficial, looking at why is it there's certain principles that no matter what culture you're in, they work. They're beneficial to the society. Why, there's so much wisdom that can be gained from all of that. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I remember I had a conversation with another biologist, my colleague, about modern medicine, right? The pharmaceutical companies, they would screen thousands of chemicals to see which one works on this disease.
Let's see what happens.
In biology, we know there are many, many very complicated large molecules you can synthesize outside of one's body. You can only make it in the cell, right? Because the cell the life has this natural micro environment
Yeah.
to make it things happen. They can produce things that you can never produce in a physical lab.
Yeah.
So like, that's why herb medicine works so well, because they can cover so many more,
Yeah.
much larger scale of very complicated compounds that you cannot synthesize in a biopharmaceutical company.
Yeah.
And like, to abandon the traditional herb medicine was such a mistake, because
Oh yeah.
our ancestors already tested all the herb to see if you use this one or that one, if you process them this way or that way, it will work on this disease. And like that works very well, you know, uh, comparing to the way of modern medicines
Yeah.
is developed.
Yeah, new and improved isn't necessarily improved, and but and I love the image that you're sharing there, because life produces, right. It's amazing what a plant can do, isn't it? I mean, it's
Yes.
making something. It's actually taking dirt and water and making something we can consume, something that can have biological effects in our body, physically. I mean, that's incredible. Man can't do that. I think
Exactly.
I was just studying leaven the other day. I think of real leaven, like a yeast or something in a bread. There's a tradition where you could make a bread, starting it with leaven, and then share a piece of it with someone else, and they share it. And for generations, you can have this leaven
Yes.
keep going because it's alive. But if you're using
Mhm.
baking soda or baking powder, no, you're not gonna. It's not natural. It's and that's kind of what you're talking about there. That beauty of that life,
Yes.
that's there.
Yes, life is amazing if you think about it. Like, we've been studying life for so many years. We still cannot synthesize a cell from
Yeah.
scratch,
No.
right? You cannot even make a vesicle, a bubble
No.
of the cell.
No.
Like,
No.
life is so complicated. And as a scientist, as a biologist, I really admire and I was humbled. The more I learned, the more I was humbled
Yeah.
by what nature can do.
Yeah, because there's no end to it. It's incredible, the complexity, the beauty, the way everything works together, right? The symbiosis, all that, just the way,
Mhm.
and then as we are who we were created to be, it's going to bring more life. It's going to bring more health. That should be what we want. I can't imagine how people get into a mindset, and of course you shared some of the ways that these outside forces come in and they oppress, they bring fear and all this, but for people to embrace a culture that wants to harm other individuals, that wants to stop other individuals from sharing their story, that wants to shout down the other one, that wants to kill somebody else, that wants to. Well, in our country right now, we have people throwing fire bombs and things and attacking stuff. It makes no sense. How do you embrace that kind of stuff? To know the beauty of life and to be able to embrace that, I think is so important.
Yeah, I mean, I see the problem in the United States now.
Yeah.
And I think it's just repeating what is happening in China, what has happened in China, right? I remember when before Communist Party came, right? If you read the literature they published before the Communist Party took over China. I mean, it sounded really good, right? It sounded like they wanted to build a utopia. Like,
Right. It's it's
they
it's
were for
always
the
like
people.
for the
But
people, right? It's for the people.
yes,
It's
yes.
all about, yeah.
Yeah, they sounded wonderful. And then once they took over the country, they took land from everyone, right? They say
Yeah.
we're going to have an equal share of everything. But then they took the land and they went to Communist Party leaders' hands. And people lost their land. People lost everything.
Yeah.
Like it was a lie. And the way they distorted history. I
Yeah.
mean, I see America,
Yeah.
I mean, having a problem now, like gradually losing its traditional value. And I know where it is the country is heading to
Yeah.
if we
Yeah.
let it happen as it's. I know where it's going to. If you look at China, you know where America is heading to.
Right.
And I'm even more concerned about how the communist China is now infiltrating into
Yeah.
our society now, right? Like after I came to the US, I mean, in the past 20 years, I'm seeing more and more American media taken over by the Chinese
Yeah.
Communist Party, like because China has money.
Yeah.
They have so much money they can buy the media.
And
They can pay the
Americans
media.
like money. Americans really like money, and it's amazing how cheaply many individuals will sell out their own ideas or anything, just whatever. They'll sell themselves pretty cheap these days.
It's just very sad. Some, I think, are corrupted, right? Like
Oh yeah,
they knew what they were doing. They still were bought out by the communist Chinese government, and some were brainwashed. They
Yeah.
just thought they were doing something great, like they are helping
Yeah.
China by supporting the Communist Party,
Yeah.
right? They say we want to do business with China so that naturally and magically the Communist Party would embrace freedom.
yeah,
But they
yeah,
actually were investing on the
yeah.
Communist Party. They are giving them more and more money by bringing business
Oh yeah,
to have their business in China, right? When they invest in China, they invest in the Chinese Communist Party.
yeah, yeah. And it's not for companies. It's not doing a due diligence, perhaps, in finding out the reality of what's happening. I mean, if you got some manufacturing individual company having something manufactured there, and they're not looking into how that manufacturing is being done. If it's slave labor, they might want to reconsider what they're doing, right? And so some of them, it's brainwashing, not knowing it, not wanting to know it, right? Not listening to what they hear. For some, it can be greed. There's so many different levels of deception, tools that the enemy uses to get people to go down a path that's just not positive in any way. They think it's positive for them because they're getting the money, so they can do whatever they want. But it's not positive for creation, for others.
Yeah, and also Americans are generally naive about Communist Party because you don't learn their history, right? Like for example, if you have a manufacturing company in China, right? Like say we're going to produce, this product, right? We want to see how the factory look like.
Oh
right?
yeah,
You may visit the factory and
it'll look
everything
perfect.
look normal. People
Yeah.
have it look perfect, but
Everybody's
and then
happy.
like that's not the factory. That's a different one. It
Yep.
was a sample factory,
Yep.
right? Like the actual factory is probably like slave labor. You don't know where they're produced, but they would show you a sample factory. Everyone looked perfect, and so I think it's very sad because for Americans growing up in this such a peaceful. Beautiful country, like you never
Right.
saw slave labor,
Well,
right?
it
Like
doesn't,
you never saw
it doesn't
evil.
make sense, right? It doesn't for
Yeah.
us. It just doesn't. It doesn't fit our mindset. We haven't seen it. We haven't experienced it for most of us. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah,
You don't expect people to lie to you.
yeah,
You don't expect people could lie to you to such an extent,
Right.
right? I remember when the COVID started, right? Like Xi Jinping said, "Oh, it will end in April," and President Trump believed that. Oh, it will end in April. Xi Jinping said so. I mean, just look how long it took.
Yeah.
It still have not ended.
yeah.
So
It
like
hasn't,
you
hasn't
don't
stopped yet.
expect you don't expect a government would lie.
Right.
You don't expect the whole society, the whole government would lie like that.
Yeah.
Openly. Like if they can lie about Tiananmen massacre, right?
Right.
What else they cannot lie about? Like they can make up a company, say like this is a perfect company. They can
Yeah.
produce products elsewhere,
Yeah.
and show you the company, and everyone feels happy, right? Such a wonderful place to produce establish our supply chain. And all the money were taken by the Communist Party. Like think about how hard the Chinese people work, right?
Yeah.
They're paid very low, very low.
Yeah.
My husband's family in China, like how much they earn, like ordinary Chinese people, like 2,000 yuan. That means like $300
Wow.
per month,
Yikes.
and that was typical income for
Yeah.
ordinary Chinese, like $300 per month. They work so hard. Not any less than Americans.
And there's no real room for advancement. The only way you can advance really is through the government, isn't it? I mean, there's not. It's not like
the government
hard work
took
or-
all the money.
Yeah.
Yeah, the government took all the money. They made the salary so low. The government took all the money and made all the profits, and they used this money, right, to to like develop military, to develop like the police system, right, to crack down Chinese. And they use this money to buy American media. See, they can pay New York Times all
Yeah.
this money, right, to run these articles against Shen Yun, against Falun Gong. They can buy Hollywood, right? Like we are going to invest money to create a film in Hollywood to praise the Communist Party, and they can be made in a very well done way, right? Like it look like a science fiction, like the Martian, gravity, right? You think American astronauts get stuck in deep space, who will come to rescue them? The Chinese Communist Party came to rescue them, right? I mean, you look at like a normal Hollywood film, everyone like, oh, great film, Hollywood, like, box office is great, but actually the message is to praise the Communist Party, because Communist Party came to rescue you whenever you are in trouble. And communism has better technology; they can get your astronaut back.
Yeah.
So
you're
these are
not
all
going to
propaganda.
you're not going to see a lot of evil Chinese communists in a Hollywood movie.
I don't think
Just
so.
not going to
at
happen.
all.
No, it's not going
Not
to happen.
going to happen, because China is now the number 2 largest film market in the world, right? They say they have 1.4 billion
sports,
Chinese people, right?
Also, sports,
And
is an
sports
area.
too, right? Like NBA and everything. If you dare to say no to the Communist Party, even if you say stand with Hong Kong, you're in big trouble, right?
Yeah.
This is how they can censor Americans. Self-censor. Not force you to censor. You self-censor.
You do it yourself. Like your parents,
You do it
right?
yourself.
It's much like what your parents' situation. Well, we want to be educated. We want you to learn, but don't learn. You self-control it. You don't. Yep. Because you want the money for us, for America. Want the money, right?
And I'm seeing Americans self-censoring themselves so that they can obey the Communist Party's rule, right? Like for me to give this have this conversation with you and talk about all this nasty history of the Tiananmen massacre and everything, many Americans would say you're anti-China. I'm Chinese, right? I praise communists. I praise Chinese communists. I say I love Chinese culture and history. I talk about history of tea, Chinese medicine. And then when I criticize Chinese Communist Party, they would say I'm anti-China, because these Americans were already so afraid of losing the Chinese market.
Yeah.
Right? They would self-censor themselves in media, in Hollywood, in education system, and also in entertainment, everything. Like they would self-censor themselves. And when Americans start to self-censor, Americans would naturally develop this propaganda bubble, because you self-censor, you develop this bubble by yourself, like so that very few Americans can see speeches or articles against Communist Party.
Right.
And they would create this bubble of propaganda in the U.S. Let Americans create them.
Yeah, and we've seen a lot of the different kind of the censorship, the pressing down of truth. One of the areas was COVID. When the whole COVID thing came, and they were trying to do a narrative in our country of what it was and what you had to do, and they're suppressing people from just talking. Right or wrong, let people talk. Different ideas with healing. It's really definitely disappointing to see the way all of that was handled in our country. The issues with the healthcare system, issues with the education system, issues with our government really came to the forefront through all of that crisis that we had with all of that. It's okay that you have to struggle with the light.
It's all right.
Yeah, it's okay. People can hear it. If they're more worried about what we look like than what we're saying, then they're probably at the wrong place anyway. So we're good.
Well, I would say during the COVID, what shocked me the most was the censorship in the scientific community, right? I always had this illusion that scientists pursue truth, right? I always thought that scientists should be spiritual. You're the ones pursuing the truth. If you don't pursue the truth, you're going to fail, right? I was so surprised during the COVID about the censorship in the science community. I was first shocked about the news reports about the Wuhan lab. I remember in January 2020, right? I read all the news reports about the seafood market and everything. I saw means this from bat because Chinese people don't eat bat.
Yeah.
We don't eat bat. It's not in our culture, right? We don't eat like this. Bat is nasty bird, like animal. Like we don't eat this kind of thing.
Bugs maybe,
It's almost
but
like
bats, no.
eating. No, not bat. Like
Right.
And Wuhan is in central China. There's not even a single bat in Wuhan.
Right.
Right. Like this is not a place that bat lives. And then like I saw these reports about this Wuhan lab. I read that article published by Wuhan lab in 2015 about gain of function. I read that article. I said, wow, they're doing something really dangerous because they're changing the coronavirus from bat to make them able to infect mouse. And that is a gain of function study. I see this should be illegal, like, all over the world, but they're doing that in China. And I thought what I expected in spring of 2020 was like China would say, oh, the Wuhan lab created this virus, so we're going to punish these scientists and make them scapegoats, right? Like say, okay, there's nothing wrong with Communist Party, it's just these researchers made this virus. I was expecting that because always like, that was how the Communist Party, say, oh, it's not our fault, it's all these people's fault, right? They always
it's their standard operating procedure. This is how they do it.
Exactly. Exactly. I was expecting that in February 2020. But then what I shocked was like the whole scientific community, right? Like, was dominated by these journalists, by these scientific giants who defended Wuhan lab, said it was not from the lab, it was from bat, and they had all these lies. I was so shocked at that time. And then I realized like many of these scientists, they have collaborations with Wuhan lab. So they collaborated with the Wuhan lab, giving them money, giving them the technology, published paper together with them to get more funding, right? They gain benefit from this. And then like, they don't want to expose like what they're doing. And they saw like general public can be easily brainwashed, like, they can lie, like say, oh, that was not a gain of function study. That was, the virus is like, not from the lab, it's from nature, it's from like other animals. How many years has been? Like 5 years. We still don't know which animal made this virus, right? Like,
it was a bat and a snail or something. We don't know. Just some weird.
And now they don't even want to talk about it. They just say it came from animals, right? Which animal? If for 5 years you can still not find which animal it came from, that's a problematic thing. Scientifically speaking, we all know it's a lie. But the problem is that it's a lie, right?
Right.
But you have no place to speak out because all these scientific journals were controlled by those scientists with a connection with China, with the Chinese government, right? They control the whole market. If you cannot publish your paper, then you cannot speak out. Who's going to listen to you? And if you speak out, you get a backslash from many scientific giants because they have such a connection with the Chinese government. They have such a collaboration. They call it collaboration. Yes, the Chinese government would offer them money, like offer them fame and title. They can run a shadow lab in China, get millions of dollars by copying
if they visit, they'll be most honorable and they'll have the best food and the best wine and whatever they want. And well,
and if all these lies were exposed, they are going to be in big trouble in the U.S. They should go to court, right? Like in the U.S., they should be charged for doing all of this. So that's why they want to cover up all of this. And I would say like this was the most shocking experience to me in COVID, about how the scientific community were infiltrated or controlled by the Chinese government.
Because you would expect science to absolutely be based on truth, evidence, right? What you can prove, what you can see. That's the only thing that makes sense with science. Otherwise, what is it? I don't know. But then to see how the same thing that we were talking about with the money, with the influence, the power, the recognition in, first of all, we talked about like with movies, Hollywood and all that, sports, all of that, politics, science, how much a group, and in this case, it's the communist Chinese, by having so much money and ability to control narrative, to control propaganda. They're excellent at that. Control population, to conform to what needs to be. How they are using that in so many areas in America to influence and to suppress truth, and suppress life, really, in the way I see it. Ability for people to just thrive and live. You talked about where the government comes in. They take everything, right? They own everything. In our country, the thing that they talk about now is where you won't own anything and you'll be happy about it. Nobody's going to own anything. You'll be happy about it, right? You just, we'll take care of the lawn for you. We'll take care of the appliance when it goes bad. We'll take care of the heat and the air conditioning. We'll take care of it all. And you'll be happy. And it's like, yeah, that doesn't work.
Well, why don't they just move to North Korea and China? Let the government take care of everything for them. Let's see what happens. Let's see what happens. I feel very sad. Like quite a few Americans, also Taiwanese, they would go to China and they would get red carpet treatment, right? They're paid really well. They eat really well. They live really well. They think this is heaven. This is paradise. And I just say, you don't know. They're raising pigs.
Yeah.
Raising pigs. You raise pigs, you feed them really well, they gain weight, the pigs gain weight, become very fat, so they live in heaven. All of a sudden, it's time to slaughter them.
Yeah. Yep.
You're gone, right?
It's done.
But until that moment, you got slaughtered. You still think you live in a paradise. You live a very good life.
Got your own slop and your own mud hole, you're good.
Yeah, and then when you live really, really well, you naturally praise the Communist Party. You become their agents. Yeah. Like in the US, in other countries, you become their agents because in every occasion you will say Communist Party is so wonderful, can make everyone live well, right? The Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party uses Americans as their agents.
Sure.
They would raise them like raising pigs and make them live very well, treat them really well so that they would be in the United States, they would praise the Communist Party, and they would self-censor and they would censor other Americans, right? Yeah. I remember during the COVID, if you say a scientist speak out the truth about the Communist Party, about the Wuhan lab, before the Communist Party would go after you, you would be backslashed by other Americans,
right?
By these scientists who are
by your
paid
peers,
really well
right?
by the Chinese government.
Right. By your peers, yeah.
By your peers. So your peers would backslash you first, punish you first. So the Chinese government already raised so many pigs in the US that they would bite if you criticize the Communist Party. They would act as agents of the Communist Party. You know how many students go to China to study, right? Xi Jinping said in 2023, when he visited San Francisco, that he's going to recruit 50,000 American students to visit China, to study in China in the next 5 years. So every year they recruit American students to China to study. These students would get financial aid, everything, scholarship, live a very good life in China and get brainwashed and come back to the US.
And then all they have to do then is toe the line, make sure that they support the Communist Party and praise all that and do everything that's positive in that way, and they'll get more support. Maybe they'll get some more funding. They won't have someone come against them and talk bad about them. They'll keep receiving all these wonderful positive things. And so for these individuals that are being used, they don't even realize, a lot of them, right, that they are trapped in a system. And whether it's the bondage of the poverty or it's a bondage of blessings, it's all coming from this one centralized system that you're beholden to.
Yes. And it's very difficult to convince them, right? It's very difficult to convince them because they were treated very well by the Communist Party, and also people are all selfish. Just think about it, if Communist Party gives you everything, make you live a very good life, you wouldn't care that millions of Uyghurs are in detention camp, so many people Falun Gong or underground Christian, how much they suffer, like, and how much you are pushing American to become a communist party country, and how many people will die because you cover up the crimes of the communist party. You don't care. You don't want to know.
Yeah, that's the scary part, isn't it?
That's a very scary part of it.
Where it leads to, right? Because it's not just about some government system. It's not just about money. It's not just about influence and prestige or whatever. We're talking about human lives and the toll on human lives through this ideology, through this philosophy, through this way of government. I think of the Lord, he talks about how in the world the government is like from above and it oppresses. But it's not that way in the kingdom. It's about, the individual. It's about a man and his wife, living together, family, community, the way that grows. And how important it is to have family. You look at what happened when with the cultural revolution in that, where they come in and they're taking the family, separating them, right? The husband and wife living in, and even for you coming out of that going, wait, husband and wives can live together? That's weird. Separating all of those things, coming in and bringing all that division and bringing this other group, this government that's going to be God. And it doesn't work, does it? The toll on humanity.
I also want to mention, when we talk about raising pigs, sooner or later, the pig would be slaughtered.
Yeah.
The pig would be slaughtered because the Communist Party, they not likely will feed you like that for the rest of your life, unless you're always useful to them. But they always have other targets that's more useful, right? So eventually they would abandon you.
Yeah.
So I see many sad cases about this, but I want to mention my brother. I never talk about my brother. My brother took the opposite path from me 30 years ago. I chose to came to the US, to study and eventually became a human rights activist. And my brother joined the Communist Party 30 years ago, or more than 30 years ago. And he wanted to climb high in the government. And it was true for 30 years, he lived a very, very good life. He climbed high in the government. But then, inside the Communist Party was like a mafia system. It is like a mafia system. There are different police force. My brother, started his career during the Jiang Zemin's time, when Jiang Zemin was Communist Party leader. And then he climbed high in the government, right? Now it's Xi Jinping's time. And Xi Jinping wanted to replace all these officials with his people, right? Because this is now a new political power. They want to replace these officials with his people.
Yep.
So what he does is he would arrest the old officials, charge them with something, put them to prison, then replace the position with his people.
Yeah.
And so that's of course the title was always corruption and this and that, in Communist Party country. Maybe indeed that was true corruption. Maybe it was not, right?
Well, the philosophy is at that point for the government, they say, show me the man, I'll show you the crime. Just tell me who you want to be guilty. We'll find something. They'll be guilty of something. It's not a problem. Yeah.
Yeah. So my brother was arrested last year, January 2024. He was arrested. And then he has been detained since then. We don't even know where he is. We don't know what kind of crime he committed. Yeah. But he lost everything. The government said you have to, they already confiscated everything.
Sure.
They also forced his wife to sell the house and give all the house selling money to the government, and then they would release him. So his house was sold. It was in Beijing. It was expensive house then, but he was not released. The government did not keep the promise. So they took everything from him. Everything, literally everything. And they still did not keep the promise to release him. We don't even know what kind of crime he committed. Okay, here we're talking about a pig, right? My brother had been a pig. He lived a good life. He worked for the Communist Chinese government, and he indeed believed Communist Party could bring him a good life. And it was true for 30 years. He would not talk to me for 30 years. I still think we love each other. We always siblings, but he would not talk to me. Yeah. For years, he got married. He never showed me the picture of his wife. His wife never saw me, And even after all this happened, right, they would not communicate with me. I heard all of this from my parents and other relatives. They would not communicate with me because they were afraid that like my identity would put them into bigger trouble.
Well, sure.
Right? But think about it.
Yeah.
Think about it. My brother was so loyal to the Communist Party, and he contributed so much to the Communist Party in the past 30 years, and he still ended up like that.
Yes.
He was a typical based trap, and well, not really physically killed yet, I guess. But
Well,
you know,
yeah, his life is over. His life as he knew it is over.
Yeah.
Right. Nothing is the same.
Yeah.
Whether physically, they release him or whatever happens to him physically, if he's still there. But for all practical purposes, his life is over. Everything he invested in, everything he built is gone. There's no legacy.
It's gone.
There's nothing. That goes to that, I mentioned a few times, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, ownership, having an ability to share something to pass on. All of that's gone, slaughtered, taken away. It's your sharing. So.
Before he was arrested, right? Like, we already have quite a few relatives urging him to leave China. Like, one of the cousins told him, like, you have to leave. Just look at how many of your colleagues were taken away. They disappeared. Right. You need to leave.
Yeah.
And my brother always saw, like, he was good. He saw like he contributed so much, and he was not such a strong, he saw that he was technical official, like he only did work. Right. He was not particularly affiliated to any
he wasn't
force.
Political. He was committed to the Communist Party. He was committed to what was happening.
Yeah.
It wasn't about who the leader was, so he should have been good.
Yeah, he didn't care about the leader. Like, he saw that he did not care about leader. He survived for 30 years. Like, he did not care about the leader. He just did his job.
Yeah.
But think about it. When one political force want to take over your job, they want to put someone else into your position.
Yeah.
And they don't want to pay you anymore, right? No. They no longer want to pay him.
We'll get somebody younger, cheaper, better looking. They talk to us nicer, whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. And this is a warning I want to give to all the other pigs, like Americans or Taiwanese or other countries, like who still serves the Communist Party, want to praise Communist Party because all kinds of benefits they're getting from Communist China, right? This could be the end. And most likely sooner or later you will end up like that, like my brother. Like, you cannot say you are better than him. He was very, very good. He was trying very, very hard. Not talk to his sister for 30 years in his position in the government, but he still lost everything. So sooner or later, like, you're going to lose everything you have. You'll end up much worse, much, much worse than when you started. So I think that would be the warning I give to all these people.
And it generally happens very sudden, doesn't it? You don't even see it coming all of a sudden.
Overnight, you lose everything. Overnight, you lose everything. When you lose everything, you do not even have time to escape, to recover. Like, I wish my brother could leave China, like just the night before he was arrested, right? Then everything would be different.
Yes.
Everything would be different. Yeah. Like, but no.
Yeah.
It was too late.
For me, the warning I would share is as a follower of my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ and being committed to Him, that the important thing is having a life that's centered on Him because He's so secure. If you're just giving into some system, some government, some ideas around you, all these things can fail. So many things can fail around us. So important for us to know Him, to know who He's created us to be, and to be, committed to again. I'm just the simplest: life, liberty, to pursuit of happiness. Protecting life, human life, protecting freedoms, and helping people have that ability to make their own choices and to own things. Just it's so simple, isn't it? Going back to wisdom you talked about earlier, just the basics are so important. And it's amazing how easy it can be if we're not careful to let money or fame or some kind of success, whatever it is that we measure as success, to distract us and to lead us astray. And there are dark forces, there are evil forces, there are forces that don't want any good for us. They're only about themselves, that will influence us using money and fame and, talk nice, flattery, all these types of things. We need to be so careful in our lives to be committed to truth and just love for humanity, for others, is so important.
Thank you very much, Dennis.
Yeah.
I agree with everything you said.
So now that you've been on this journey and here we are, tell us about what you're doing now and some of the things you're doing and why you're doing it, and some of your desires for others that may be trapped, that may not know the truth, that may be like you were back in 94, 95, going, wait, this didn't happen. This is, just go ahead and share.
I would say I still have a full-time job, and
Yep.
I also have a family to take care of. Although my children are both in college now, but still we take care of my in-laws. Like they're in their 80s, they live with us.
Nice.
And whenever I have time, besides my work and family, I'm a public speaker. I give last year I gave 93
Wow.
talks to
Wow.
different organizations. I traveled along in the U.S., especially on the West Coast, to give talk to many organizations about Chinese culture and history, and especially about human rights, and also about the Communist Party's infiltration into the United States. And I have a blog to publish some of my personal stories.
Nice.
I think you can probably publish the blog on the link. In the link of this video.
Yeah, email it to me,
Yeah.
and then I'll add it in the comments. Or yeah.
Yeah, you can add it on comments. wenchenview.blogspot.com.
Okay.
And I also encourage people to read the newspaper that my husband works for, like the Epoch Times.
Okay.
It's a newspaper. The Epoch Times is a newspaper started by the Chinese dissidents in the United States to report uncensored news about China. So Epoch Times is very truthful in reporting news about communist China, about the infiltration of the United States. So
Nice.
once you're on the page of Epoch Times, you will know everything I talk about now. It will keep you awake from what's going on, what the propaganda is trying to take you over. And also the Shenyun Performing Arts show we mentioned is for China before communism. And I would say many people did not realize that Shenyun is against communism, because we have seen so many advertisements from different groups from China, right, to praise communism.
Yeah.
People did not realize Shenyun is 100% made in USA.
Definitely.
And most of the dancers and musicians were American kids. My children auditioned for Shenyun for several years. They couldn't get in. It was so competitive. To be a musician and a dancer in Shenyun, you have to be very, very talented.
Yeah.
And once you get into Shenyun, you go to the Shenyun's high school and also college in New York, upstate New York, to study music and dance. And because Shenyun is a dissident group, right? It's for China against communism. So very few companies would sponsor Shenyun because they have business ties, right? So most of the performing arts companies in the U.S. rely on donation to survive, but Shenyun cannot rely on donation because it's a dissident group. Right. That's why they tour all over the world for shows against Communist Party's propaganda. And also they rely on the show income to support their children, like the students, to learn to study dance and music. Once an American teenager got accepted by Shenyun, they get a full financial aid, tuitions are all covered and the room and board are free, and all this money come from the Shenyun shows. Nice. So the best support you can give to the Chinese people
Yeah.
to against the Communist Party's propaganda and against Chinese Communist Party's propaganda in the U.S. is to watch Shenyun. Bring your family to watch Shenyun, and you
Yeah.
understand all the proceeds from the Shenyun will go support the American teenagers in Shenyun to learn dance and music and continue to
Nice.
perform dance and music to show China before communism. And I think that's a very good support you can provide
Yeah.
to Chinese people and American people.
And that seems to be very much right where your heart is, right? To help people see the culture, the beauty of it, the reality of the wisdom, all of that that's there. That's what a great group. And yeah, I think a lot of people wouldn't know that. I think I remember when they came down in Branson years ago, and I heard about it, and I'd be like, you'd hear some things like there was something happening with the communists either coming against them or being for them, and as an American you don't pay as attention, and what is it. So I'm glad you clarified who they are, what they're doing, why they're doing it. So I want to thank you for joining me today and sharing what you shared. I know Lynn and Dr. Mary definitely want to do some more shows with you on digging into some of these issues and stuff. But I'm just so thankful that you were able to share some of your story, even with your brother and what's happening there, and just letting people know the reality of what's happening in the world and this little understanding we have and what we can see, and as we can continue to have these conversations and just share. So I'll let you have the last word. I'm going to move over to my other controls and stuff, and just go ahead and share anything on your heart, and I'll get ready to sign us off.
I'm very honored to speak about my personal story here. And many people may think what's happening in China is very far away from Americans and they don't care about the Chinese culture and history or Chinese people. They only care about American life. But what's happening in China, what the Communist Party is doing in China and in the United States is very, very related to the life of Americans. As we mentioned, the propaganda of the Chinese Communist Party in the United States and where they are pushing Americans towards, right? If we do not take actions to stop this, and I see America we're heading to, is very dangerous. And that's why we have to care about all these issues and we have to take actions. And thank you very much for watching this episode.
Thank you, Win.